In the heart of the war-torn planet, among the ruins of a once proud city, stood a small cage. The bars were thick, the metal rusted from years of neglect. Inside, a girl sat quietly, her eyes cast downward, barely acknowledging the world around her. She had been trapped for what felt like an eternity, her life reduced to an object, a prize to be traded among the stars. The human soldier stood before the cage, staring at her. He had won this strange alien prize during a raid on a hostile planet. To him, the idea of winning an alien girl as a reward seemed strange, almost wrong. But it was his duty. Take what the commanders told him, obey the orders, and collect his prize. She was a trophy, nothing more. But as his eyes studied her, something about her caught his attention. She wasn't just a thing. She wasn't just some pleasure animal, as the others had called her. The soldiers had tossed her into the cage like an unwanted item, labeling her with cruel words, but to him, she seemed different. Her skin, pale and thin from the harsh conditions, looked fragile, yet there was a strength in her posture, a quiet defiance that didn't quite match the situation. Her eyes, deep and dark like endless night, held no anger but something else, something that he couldn't place. She was broken, yet unyielding. He watched as she curled into a corner of the cage, her thin body trembling slightly from the cold. The silence between them felt thick, as if the very air had been laced with her pain and despair. She had given up, he realized. She didn't know how to survive in this cruel new world she had been forced into. No one had cared enough to show her anything else. He walked closer to the cage, his boots making a dull thud against the cracked ground. The soldiers had told him to use her as he pleased. No one would care. She was just another alien, another casualty of war. But as he stood there, inches from the cage, he couldn't bring himself to obey. He had seen the way they treated her, like an animal, something to be bought and sold, used and discarded. The thought made his stomach twist. He bent down slowly, his voice quiet, almost gentle. "What's your name?" She didn't answer. Her eyes didn't even lift to meet his. He frowned, taking a step back. "Do you even have a name?" he asked, more to himself than to her. The girl remained silent, her gaze still fixed on the cold ground, as though she had lost the ability to care about anything at all. She had been called so many things before: slave, prisoner, animal. Maybe she had forgotten what it was like to be anything else. The soldier sighed and stood up straight. He knew the stories, the rumors about these creatures. They were wild, dangerous, and untamable. They had no emotions, only instincts, but this one seemed different. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't beg for freedom. She simply existed. She had given up, and it pained him to see her like this. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see the rest of his squad approaching. The leader, a man known for his cold, ruthless demeanor, waved a hand dismissively toward the cage. "You're wasting your time with that thing," he said, his voice filled with disdain. "Just remember what you're here for. Don't get soft." The soldier felt a knot tighten in his chest. He nodded but didn't say anything. They weren't wrong. They were here for a mission, a task to complete. But in that moment, as he looked at the girl in the cage, something shifted inside him. The mission seemed less important than it had before. The squad leader didn't notice the change. He had already moved on to the next part of the operation, leaving the soldier standing alone before the cage. He stared down at the girl again, her thin form curled in the corner. His mind was racing. He couldn't let her stay like this. No, one should be treated like this, not even her. Without another word, he reached down, his hand carefully sliding through the bars. The girl flinched, her body tensing, ready to shrink back into the shadows. But instead of grabbing her, he pulled out a small blanket from his pack and gently pushed it through the bars. The girl froze, her eyes flicking to the fabric, then back to him. She didn't move. Not at first. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against the blanket. She didn't take it. She didn't need to. She only wanted to feel its warmth for a moment, something to remind her that she wasn't completely forgotten. The soldier watched her silently. There was no movement from the other soldiers, no laughter or jeers. For the first time since he had arrived, the silence between them felt peaceful. The blanket was a small gesture, but it meant something. He wasn't treating her like an animal. He wasn't going to treat her like the others did. He stayed there for a moment longer before stepping back. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let her fade away without a fight. The human soldier turned and walked away, but as he did, he glanced back one last time. The girl had taken the blanket and wrapped it around herself, her eyes finally lifting to meet his for just a second. And in that brief moment, something flickered in her gaze. Hope. Just the smallest hint that maybe, just maybe, someone cared. For the first time since being locked in that cage, she wasn't alone anymore. The sun had long since set, casting a blanket of darkness over the barren landscape. The soldier couldn't shake the image of the girl in the cage from his mind. Her face haunted him, her silent, sad eyes following him everywhere. He had seen his fair share of war, of violence, of destruction, but something about her made him feel like he had seen it all in vain. She wasn't a casualty of war. She wasn't a prisoner. She was a person. As he walked away from the others, the weight of his decision sat heavy on his shoulders. He had given her a blanket. A simple thing, really, but it felt like the beginning of something bigger. He couldn't explain why, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just walk away and leave her to suffer. Not when he could do something about it. Later that evening, while the others settled around a fire, talking about their next move, the soldier found himself standing near the cage again. His hands were trembling, but he steadied himself. He wasn't sure what he intended to do. Maybe it was the loneliness that had built up over years of fighting, or maybe it was the idea of the alien girl, so quiet, so broken, yet so full of unspoken thoughts, that had drawn him back. He crouched down in front of the cage once more, not saying anything at first. The silence between them stretched thick and heavy, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something different. The girl sat in the far corner of the cage, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes still avoiding his. She had never looked at him directly, not until now. The soldier hesitated, unsure of what to say or do. The others had made it clear that she was nothing more than a reward, a trophy. She wasn't worth saving. But to him, she was more than that. She was someone who had been abandoned, someone who had lost everything. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small ration pack. He didn't know if she even ate food like this. Alien rations were unknown to him, but he figured it couldn't hurt to offer. He opened the pack and gently slid it through the bars of the cage. The girl's eyes flickered to it, but she didn't move at first. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "I just want you to eat something. I know, you're hungry." Her gaze shifted to him, and for the first time she didn't look away immediately. There was a flicker of something. Confusion, maybe curiosity, but it was something. Slowly she reached out and took the ration. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. He smiled softly. "It's all right. You don't have to trust me right away. I know I'm not like the others." She didn't respond, but she did unwrap the ration and cautiously take a small bite. Her eyes, though still guarded, softened just a little. The soldier took a slow breath, watching her. He knew he couldn't fix everything with a single meal or a blanket. But in that moment, it felt like the first real step in changing everything. Days passed, and the soldier continued to visit her. The rest of the squad remained indifferent to her, treating her as a trophy, a mere possession. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. He noticed things, small things, that no one else seemed to care about. The way she flinched when someone moved too quickly, the way she avoided eye contact as though afraid to be seen. She had been broken in ways he couldn't even imagine, and yet, there was a part of her that was still whole. He could see it, in her eyes, the same spark that told him she hadn't given up completely. Not yet. One evening, after a particularly brutal skirmish, the soldier found himself once again crouching down in front of the cage. The alien girl was still there, still wrapped in the blanket, her gaze on the ground. He noticed that her hair, once matted and filthy, now had the faintest sheen to it. She hadn't been able to bathe properly, but the blanket and the food had helped her recover a little. He leaned forward slightly. "I don't know your name," he said quietly, "but you're not just an animal. You're more than that." The girl's eyes lifted, her gaze meeting his for the first time. Her face was still guarded, but there was a spark in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe something deeper. She was beginning to understand him just as he was beginning to understand her. "I'll give you a name," the soldier continued, "if you want one." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "A name means you're more than just what they called you. It means you're someone, a person, not just a thing." The girl didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. There was a shift between them, a quiet understanding. She wasn't ready to trust him fully, but she was starting to believe that he wasn't like the others. He wasn't just another man who wanted to use her. "Maybe you'll never forgive me for what's happened to you," he said softly, "but I'll try to make it right." As he stood up to leave, he took one last glance at the girl. She was still sitting in the corner, her head slightly tilted as she regarded him. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, he believed that there was hope, for her, and for them. She wasn't just a broken creature in a cage anymore. She was something more. The soldier turned and walked back to the fire, the weight of the world still heavy on his shoulders, but his heart, for the first time in a long while, felt a little lighter. The days grew colder and the wind howled through the barren planet, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. Yet within the small camp, there was a warmth that had nothing to do with fire. It came from the quiet moments between the soldier and the alien girl. The rest of the squad continued to ignore her, treating her as little more than an object of curiosity. But to him, she was someone worth saving, worth understanding. It had been a few weeks since he'd given her the blanket, and things were changing. Little by little, the girl was starting to trust him, and it was clear in the way. She watched him now, less wary, more present. There was still an invisible wall between them, but the soldier could feel it weakening. Each day he would stop by her cage, offering her food, water, and small gestures of kindness. At first she had only taken what he gave, her eyes constantly lowered, her shoulders stiff with tension. But as time passed, he noticed small changes. She began to sit closer to the bars when he arrived, her hands no longer trembling when he offered her food. She even started to meet his gaze, though it was only for a few seconds, and then she'd look away, as if still unsure of him. One evening, after a long patrol, the soldier returned to the camp feeling exhausted. The others were asleep, their snores filling the silence of the night. He had been to war many times, seen horrors, lost comrades, and endured pain he thought he could never forget. But this was different. The girl had become a constant thought in his mind, and for the first time in a long while he found himself thinking about the future, her future. What would happen to her once the war was over? What kind of life could she have? He moved toward her cage as usual, his steps slow and deliberate. The girl was sitting in the corner, her blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the ground. The soldier crouched down in front of the cage, his hand reaching through the bars, offering her a small piece of food. She glanced up at him, her gaze lingering a moment longer than usual, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen before: curiosity. She didn't reach for the food right away, but instead her lips parted as if she was about to speak. The soldier's heart skipped a beat. He had seen her struggle to communicate before, but he had never expected this moment to come so soon. I'm not hungry," she whispered, her voice soft and uncertain, barely audible. It was the first time she had spoken to him, and the words hit him harder than he expected. They were so simple, yet so meaningful. He smiled gently. "That's okay. he said. You don't have to eat if you don't want to. The girl didn't say anything more, but there was something different in her expression. She wasn't just an object of pity anymore. She was alive, and she was starting to connect with him. For a brief moment, their eyes met fully, and the soldier saw the faintest flicker of something, a spark of recognition, of trust, maybe even hope. It was a small thing, but it meant more to him than he could express. He sat down on the ground in front of her cage, his back against the bars. The night was quiet, the only sounds the wind and the occasional rustling of the campfire. He didn't want to force her to talk, so he simply sat there in silence, letting her be. Slowly, she shifted, moving slightly closer to the bars, her blanket wrapped tightly around her. Why don't you tell me your name? The soldier asked gently, his voice low. I know you don't have one yet, but maybe we can come up with something together. For a long time she said nothing, but the soldier could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was thinking, considering the idea of a name, of her own identity. The thought made his chest tighten. What had she been called before? What name had she been given by those who treated her like a prize? After what felt like an eternity, the girl finally spoke again, her voice barely more than a whisper. I don't know. The soldier nodded, understanding the pain behind her words. That's okay. You'll have one now, a name you can choose whenever you're ready. She didn't respond right away, but there was a shift in the air. He could feel it. She wasn't the same broken creature she had been when he first met her. She had changed, and so had he. A soft sound broke the silence, and the soldier looked up. The girl's lips were trembling, her face uncertain, but then something incredible happened. The faintest of smiles tugged at the corner of her mouth. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The soldier's heart swelled. That's it, he whispered, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. You have a smile. You do have a name, and it's your choice. It always has been. For the first time since meeting her, the alien girl's face softened. She looked at him directly, and the smile grew a little. It was brief, fleeting, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She hadn't just survived. She was beginning to live again. The soldier sat in the silence with her for a while longer, a sense of peace settling over him. He knew their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. But in that moment, he felt a bond, an unspoken promise, that he wouldn't leave her behind no matter the cost. And for the girl, it seemed like the first time in a long time she allowed herself to believe in that promise. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the barren landscape. It was a quiet night, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. The soldier sat near the campfire, his eyes flickering toward the cage where the girl now rested. She had changed. There was no denying it. She wasn't the same broken creature he had found weeks ago, abandoned and forgotten. No longer did she cower in fear, hiding in the corner of the cage. She had started to look at him with something he never thought he'd see in her eyes. Trust. But peace, he knew, was a fragile thing. The sound of boots crunching on the dirt snapped him out of his thoughts. He stood quickly, his hand instinctively, reaching for the sidearm at his waist. Shadows loomed in the distance, moving toward the camp. A group of soldiers, his squad, but different. They were not the men he had fought alongside. These were higher-ranking officers, the kind who didn't care about lives or morals, only objectives. The soldier's heart sank. He watched them approach, their faces cold and impassive, as if they were merely walking toward an objective, not a human being. And there she was, sitting in her corner, wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her eyes didn't flinch at the approaching figures, but he could see the tremor in her hands. The leader of the new group, a tall officer with sharp features and a sneer that seemed permanently etched onto his face, stepped forward. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked at the soldier, his tone dripping with disdain. "That thing isn't yours, it's property. You should have reported it back, not kept it as some kind of pet." The soldier stepped between the officer and the cage. "She's not property," he said firmly, his voice betraying a hint of defiance. "She's a person, She has a name, the officer scoffed, taking a step forward. You've grown attached, how sweet. His voice was mocking, and the soldier could see the disgust in his eyes. But this is a military operation, not a charity. We'll be taking her back. Not if I can help it, the soldier replied, his hand tightening on the hilt of his weapon, but not drawing it. His heart raced, the weight of the situation settling heavily on him. The officer raised an eyebrow. Oh? And how do you plan on stopping us? You're one man. This is a corporation-owned asset. He glanced over at the cage where the girl sat, still clutching the blanket around her, but her eyes were now wide, terrified. The officers, trained to see nothing but objectives, moved toward her without hesitation. The soldier's breath hitched. You can't just take her, he said, more quietly this time. She's not something to be used, she's a living being. The officer seemed to consider this for a moment, his gaze flicking to the alien girl. She shrank back into the corner, her body language screaming fear. Her past had been nothing but pain, and now someone was threatening to rip away what little peace she had found. The soldier saw the change in her. He could see her crumple internally at the thought of being taken back, of being nothing again. No one is asking your opinion, the officer said coldly, and with a wave of his hand, his men moved forward. In that instant, everything slowed down for the soldier. He thought of the days they had spent together, the small moments, the quiet exchanges. He thought of the first time she had looked at him, really looked at him. He couldn't let them take her, not after everything she had been through, not after everything they had fought for together. Don't touch her, the soldier shouted, his voice suddenly hoarse with emotion. He stepped forward, but the officer's men blocked his path, their weapons drawn, their hands steady. The officer stepped aside, his smirk growing. You're out of your league, soldier. This is beyond your level. The soldier didn't back down. Instead, he reached for his communicator, his fingers shaking as he activated it. I'll report this, he said, his voice firm. You'll answer to higher command for this. The officer laughed, the sound bitter and low. Oh, I don't think you will, my friend. You see, I've already taken care of that. Your report's been squashed. The soldier froze. What do you mean? The officer grinned. You're a good soldier, but sometimes you're just a pawn in a much bigger game. And right now you're in the way. His men closed in. The soldier could feel the weight of the moment, the impossible decision pressing down on him. But as the first of the officers reached for the cage, he saw something in the girl's eyes. A flicker of recognition. She was scared. So scared that she couldn't even breathe. She knew what was coming. She could barely move, but she stood, her small body shaking, and her voice, though barely a whisper, reached him. Don't let them take me. The soldier's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned to face the officer. You won't take her. I won't let you. For a long moment, everything stood still. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. The soldier's mind raced, his options running out. The men in front of him were too many, too well armed, and his hand was still nowhere near his weapon. The officers were a wall, an insurmountable obstacle, but the soldier wasn't ready to give up. Move him, the officer commanded. And that was it. The soldiers surged forward. The soldier's hand shot to his sidearm. The air was thick with tension, the soldier's breath ragged as the officers closed in around him. His hand gripped the sidearm at his waist, but the weight of the decision pressing on him made his heart pound louder than any enemy could. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a knight. He was just a soldier, caught between duty and what he believed was right. But in this moment, it didn't matter. His mind was made up. You don't understand, the soldier said, his voice strained yet steady. You can't take her. She's not property. The officer, standing just a few feet away, scoffed. She's an asset. She's an object of war. And you've gone soft. We don't need your pity or your sympathy for her kind. The soldier's hand hovered over his sidearm, but he knew better than to make a rash move. His life, his future, wasn't just his own anymore. He glanced back at the girl, her eyes wide, filled with fear and confusion. She was trembling, her hands clutching the edges of the blanket he had given her. His heart twisted at the sight. He had promised her safety, a future where she wouldn't have to fear anyone, but now the very people he had once trusted were threatening to tear everything away. He turned to her, stepping toward the cage slowly, his voice low and calm. "I won't let them take you," he whispered, his eyes locking with hers. The girl didn't speak, but her gaze seemed to soften, her eyes no longer just reflecting fear, but also a flicker of something else, something that had been buried deep inside her for far too long. The officers advanced, but the soldier held his ground. The tension was unbearable. Sweat dripped down his face as his pulse quickened. He had been trained for combat, for war, but never for this. Never for someone who wasn't a soldier, a comrade. Never for someone whose life had been reduced to mere orders and commands. A sudden thought struck him, cold and final. He was going to lose her. No matter how hard he fought, no matter how many rules he broke, the weight of the military machine would crush him. The officers were too powerful, too influential, but then he saw her again. The girl, looking at him with those wide, frightened eyes, her breath shallow as if waiting for the inevitable. She wasn't just asking for his protection anymore. She had become a part of him, and in her eyes, he saw something he hadn't realized before. She was asking him to decide. Without a word, the soldier took a deep breath and slowly turned back to face the officers. They were almost within reach, their fingers hovering over the restraints on their weapons. "I won't let you take her," the soldier said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. He stepped forward, pushing through the officers, but they didn't move. They stood firm, one of them reaching out to grab his arm. In a flash, the soldier turned and shoved him aside. A flash of movement, and he was past them, moving toward the cage. His legs burned, but he couldn't stop now. The girl was standing, her feet unsteady, but she was standing, eyes wide with surprise. He reached for the cage bars, gripping them tightly, and in that moment, he could see her looking at him like she had never looked before. Not with fear, not with mistrust, but with something he couldn't quite describe, a quiet understanding. Then, it happened. The girl stepped forward. She walked toward the bars of the cage, her steps hesitant at first, but growing steadier. Her hands trembled, but her eyes never left his. She reached out, her fingers curling around the bars, a silent question lingering in the air. The soldier stared at her, frozen. For a moment he wondered if she even understood what was happening. She had been a prisoner, a tool, a thing to be used. Now she was choosing something else. "Please," the soldier whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to do this. You can be free." The girl's gaze flickered to the soldiers behind him, then back to the soldier in front of her. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The decision had already been made. With a deep breath, the girl nodded, stepping forward, her small hands pushing the cage door open, the metal scraping against the ground. The soldier stood there, stunned, as the girl took a step toward him. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. There was no uncertainty. There was only something raw and real, a strength that had been hidden away for so long, buried beneath years of abuse. She chose to stay. The soldiers froze, their weapons lowered. The officer's eyes narrowed as he watched the girl step out of the cage, her face calm, her body strong. It was a silent act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against everything she had been told. The soldier stepped back, his heart racing as he reached out to her. She had made her choice. The cage was open, but she had chosen not to run. She had chosen to stand with him. The officer spoke again, his voice dark and threatening. "You don't know what you're doing. You're in way over your head. She's nothing more than an asset, something you can't protect." The girl didn't respond. She only took the soldier's hand, gripping it tightly as she faced the officer and the others behind him. Her decision was made. "I'm not a thing," she said, her voice calm and steady. It was the first time she had spoken with such clarity, the first time her voice carried real strength. The soldier's grip tightened around her hand. "Neither am I," he said. For the first time since their paths had crossed, the soldiers didn't move forward. There was no order given. The battle was over before it even began. The girl had chosen to stay, and in that moment, they were both free. The silence that followed was suffocating. The officers stood frozen, unsure of how to respond to what had just unfolded before them. The soldier held the girl's hand tightly, standing his ground even as the world around him seemed to hold its breath. The girl, once a prisoner in that cold metal cage, was now free, not in body but in spirit. She had chosen to stand with him. The decision was made, and in that moment there was no going back. But the soldiers around them weren't backing down. The officer who had once sneered at the soldier's attempt to protect her now took a step forward, his gaze cold, calculating. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've made yourself a target. You've put your entire squad in danger. There's no place for a creature like that here. She was a tool of war, not a companion." The soldier looked at the girl beside him. She had started to stand taller, her shoulders less hunched, her gaze more direct. The blanket he had given her earlier had become a symbol of something much more significant. It was no longer just a piece of cloth to cover her. It was her first choice, a step toward reclaiming her identity. Her eyes shifted to the officer, then back to the soldier. There was something in her eyes now, something that had never been there before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And her life, it seemed, had no room for those who saw her as nothing more than an object. The soldier turned back to the officer, his voice low but unwavering. "She's not yours to take anymore." The officer laughed bitterly. "You can't just protect her because you feel sorry for her. Do you really think she will be accepted here? Do you think anyone will care about her? She's an alien, a thing. You're making a mistake, soldier." The soldier's grip tightened on the girl's hand, and he stepped forward, blocking the officer's path. "She's a person. You don't get to define her, no one does." For a moment the officer said nothing, his eyes narrowing. He was sizing up the soldier, weighing the situation. Behind him, the other men in his squad shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to make the first move, but the girl wasn't waiting for anyone else to make decisions for her. She took a step forward, her small frame seemingly brimming with newfound courage. She glanced at the soldier, then back at the officer. "She's right," she said, her voice stronger than the soldier had ever heard it. "I am not a tool. I am not an object to be traded. I am not nothing." Her words, though quiet, seemed to shake the ground beneath them. There was a moment of silence, a long pause as the soldiers processed what had just happened. The girl, who had once been treated like a broken, disposable thing, was now speaking for herself. She was taking back her voice, her identity. The officer's eyes flickered with frustration, but he couldn't hide the slight hesitation in his step as he looked at the girl. "You're nothing but a slave, no matter what name you're given. That's all you'll ever be to them." The girl didn't flinch. She stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. "Not anymore," she said firmly, meeting his gaze without fear. The soldier's heart swelled with pride. She was no longer the frightened, broken alien he had first encountered. She was powerful in her own right. And this moment, this simple act of defiance, was just the beginning of her transformation. She had chosen to stand with him, but more importantly, she had chosen to stand for herself. Without warning, the girl stepped away from the soldier and moved toward the officer, her movements steady. The officer, still unsure how to react, stepped back as she approached. "I don't need your approval," she continued, her voice quiet but filled with the strength of someone who had reclaimed her humanity. "I don't need anyone's permission to be who I am, and neither does he." The officer looked at her, his face flushed with anger, but there was no longer any mockery in his gaze. He didn't know how to handle her. The soldiers who had stood in the background watching silently now shifted uneasily. They weren't sure what to do in the face of such unexpected courage. It was as if the air had thickened with the weight of her words. The soldier stepped forward to stand beside her, his hand still holding hers. "She's free," he said, his voice stronger than before. "And I'll make sure no one forgets that." The officer sneered but knew there was nothing more to be said. His power over them had already started to slip away. The girl had spoken. She had claimed her voice, her freedom, and her choice. And it had all happened without violence, without bloodshed. For the first time since she had been taken, the girl smiled, genuinely, without fear, without shame. It was small, but it was real. The officer turned away, signaling for his men to follow. They moved off reluctantly, still unsure of how to process what had just unfolded. The soldier stood there watching them go. He knew this was far from over. There would be others who saw the girl only as an asset, a prize to be claimed. But for now, in this moment, she had taken control of her own life, and that was something worth fighting for. When they were alone again, the girl looked up at him, her smile growing just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. The soldier nodded, his heart full. "No," he said softly, his voice gentle. "Thank you." And for the first time, they both knew there was no turning back. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, had chosen to be free. The camp was quiet again, save for the crackling of the fire and the distant whispers of the wind sweeping through the ruins. The girl sat by the fire now, no longer in the cage but beside the soldier. There was no longer any sign of the fear that had once consumed her. Instead, her face was soft with a quiet peace, a peace she had never known. It had taken so much to get here, but now she was free. She had made her choice, and she had found someone who would stand beside her no matter the cost. The soldier watched her from across the fire. There was no longer any hesitation in her movements. She ate the food he gave her with no fear, her eyes looking up at him, occasionally meeting his gaze without the wariness that had once defined every glance. She had been broken once, but now she was becoming something else, someone else. And for the first time, the soldier realized that they both were. "Do you know what your name means?" The soldier asked softly, his voice carrying over the crackling. "Flames." The girl looked at him, her face blank for a moment as she considered his words. She had chosen a name for herself a few nights ago, when the idea of identity had finally begun to sink in. It was a simple name, nothing grand or complex, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She nodded slowly, the corner of her mouth twitching upward in a small smile. "It means light," she said, "because I want to be more than what they made me. I want to be something good." The soldier's heart swelled at her words. She was finally choosing herself, her identity, her future. She wasn't just the girl they had called a pleasure animal or a tool of war. She was her own person, and no one could take that away from her. "You already are," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You already are." TY. Night grew colder, but the warmth from the fire and the connection between them made the chill seem far away. The soldier leaned back against a rock, his eyes staring up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. There had been moments of darkness in his life, moments when he had doubted everything he was fighting for. But in this moment, as he sat beside the girl who had become so much more than what she had been, he knew that he had done the right thing. She wasn't just a part of his mission anymore. She was part of his life. And he would protect her. "No matter what, you know," the soldier said, his voice thoughtful. "You've been through so much. I don't think I could ever truly understand everything you've faced, but I promise I'll be here. You'll never be alone again." The girl looked at him, her eyes soft, full of gratitude. "I know," she said. "And you're more than just my protector. You're my family. I never had one before." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always thought of her as someone to protect, someone to help. But now, in this moment, he realized that she had become something far more precious to him, someone he would stand by, no matter the odds. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet. "You'll always have a place with me, no matter where we go. This is your home now." She smiled, the expression full of warmth and hope. "And you're mine," she replied. "I never thought I'd have someone like you, someone who truly sees me." The soldier felt a lump form in his throat, but he quickly swallowed it down. The night felt different now, filled with a kind of clarity he hadn't expected. They had come a long way from the soldier who had rescued a broken alien girl from a cage. Now they were partners, equal, connected, a bond forged not by war, but by something stronger, something that neither of them had ever believed possible. The girl turned her gaze to the fire, her fingers playing absent-mindedly with the edges of her blanket. She had come so far from being nothing more than a pleasure animal to being a person with a name, a home, and a future. And she was no longer defined by her past. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the night. "For giving me this. For giving me a chance to live." The soldier reached across the fire, offering her his hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers gently closing around his. There was no fear in her touch now, no doubt. Only trust. Only the promise of what was to come. "There's nothing to thank me for," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "You saved yourself." She smiled at him, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her eyes. "We saved each other." In the quiet of the night, with the stars overhead and the fire between them, the soldier and the girl shared a moment of peace, a moment that neither of them had thought possible. They had both chosen something greater than survival. They had chosen each other, and in doing so they had chosen to build a future together.